everyone, my name is Paul Vojchehoske. I'm the director of Randall School of Real Estate, and welcome to this video. In today's video, this is what we call a study buddy video. This is a supplemental resource for your 6-hour professionalism course called Developing Professional Conduct and Ethical Practices. Now, everybody should have this skinny little booklet that we got or you got from the school. This is the home study version of this course. Now, I decided to put this video together again to help you supplement as you're reading through, because unfortunately, the one thing I don't like about this course, it was written by the Real Estate Commission, but it's in bullet format, not textbook format, so it's a little more difficult to read. So that's why I wanted to go through this. One thing before we get started, because you do have to take an exam and get a 70% to get a completion certificate, I'm going to be going through and then telling you certain areas of this booklet that you need to highlight. So please be aware of that. So if I tell you to highlight something, please highlight it because you're going to need it later on, my guess is, for maybe an exam. I do want to talk about, before we actually get to the nuts and bolts here, how this all came about. Why do we have this extra 6-hour class? Because for years, to get your to be eligible to set for the real estate exam, you needed 2 30-hour classes, 60 hours of pre-licensing education total. Now we have to have 66 because of this course. Well, 2015, the National Association of Realtors did a survey of the general public and what their perception was of our industry. And there was some troubling things that they found. And, you know, for example, not very competent agents putting their own interest in front of their clients, those type of things. And so they went out to the 50 different state associations and said, okay, Nebraska, the State Realtor Association here in Nebraska, we want you to deal with this in your state and come up with a plan to help overcome this, because the impacts are long term. I mean, if you have an industry that's not viewed as very ethical or have no integrity, that impacts your business, even if you're an agent that's very ethical and you do things very with high integrity. It makes your job harder. So that's why they put this out. Now, Nebraska chose to actually make a legislative change to the pre-licensing requirements, and therefore we have the 6-hour class. So on your screen is the PowerPoint. You do not have the PowerPoint, but we're going to go through the PowerPoint. You do have this booklet, so let's go through the booklet here. Page 3 of your booklet is the course objectives. Now, most of the course objectives revolve around the things that were included in the danger report. Now, we're going to talk briefly about the danger report in a few minutes, but we're going to hit as many of these as we can. Certainly, this book will cover all of them. And the other thing to note is I'm not going to cover every single part of this book. I'm just going to hit the highlights here, and then you have to read the rest. But let's start on page 4, because there are 3 terms that we have to know. It's the basis for this entire 6-hour course. They are ethics, values, and, well, let me get caught up here on the, there we go, on the PowerPoint. There are ethics, values, and principles, and I do want to talk about each one of these. And, oh, by the way, you do need to highlight each one of those. Ethics, values, and principles at the top of page 4. Ethics. Let's define what ethics is. Ethics is a body of principles or standards of human conduct that governs one's behavior. Let me give you an example. You don't rob a bank because you know that if you rob a bank, it's against the law and you'll go to jail. So the law is the behavior modification tool. Now, if it was against the law to rob the bank, but nothing would happen to you, then everybody would be knocking off a bank every day. So the law is a behavior modification. Maybe you don't steal, or maybe you don't lie, or maybe you don't have an affair on your spouse because you believe in what the 10 Commandments say in the Bible. Or maybe you're Muslim and there's a certain requirement or prohibition in the Quran that prevents that. That is your standard that governs your conduct. That's the principle of ethics. The Realtor Code of Ethics is very professional. It's very well written. And the whole idea is, if you're a member, you have to follow the Code of Ethics. And if you follow the Code of Ethics, that governs your behavior. That impacts how you behave and how you make decisions. Values, let's define what values are. Values are how we ought to behave and are feeling oriented to, and they can change depending on the situation. Values is one of those things that we have values at one point of our life, but based on our experiences and those type of things, those may change. Let me give you an example. Maybe you grew up in a house that was very religious, and your parents taught you that premarital sex is not okay. But after you get out of under the umbrella of your parents, you live on your own, maybe you start to change that value. Then maybe older in life, you see maybe the consequences of single parent households and stuff. So you go back to, you know what, my value is you should, wait to have sex until you're married. That is a value, and it changes. It ebbs and flows, and not only with you, but society. Society ebbs and flows with their values as well. But those values are brought into our real estate transaction in our profession. A principle, unlike a value, which is subjective, a principle is very objective. So the definition of a principle is they are truths or propositions that are so clear to the individual that they cannot be proved otherwise or contradicted. And let me give you an example of that. In today's world would be abortion. You have pro-life and pro-choice, and some are very on the ends of it. So you have a pro-life person that no matter what evidence you present, no matter what rationale, no matter what, they're never going to change their mind. That is a principle, and they vote. Values voter. They vote. They don't care who the politician. They don't care what party they are. They vote based on pro-life. Then you have the other side, pro-choice. No matter if it's a Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't matter. They will vote pro-choice. And nothing you can say or do will change that principle. All right? So it's not up for debate, if you will. Now, individuals have all three of these. And they bring those ethics, values, and principles into the business. That also mirrors society as well. And we're going to talk more about that in a different slide. All right? So the question is, how do you feel a real estate professional is perceived by the public? Now, I know it's a little difficult for you to maybe do this because you're not in the profession yet, or at least most of you aren't, but it's kind of fun when we're in class and we have a classroom setting, and we do have those that are getting their broker's license, so they have to take this class. And so we have this debate. But it is important. Here's what I would tell you. It is important for the public to perceive the real estate industry as professional, because it makes your job a lot easier. Think about when you go and you buy a car. We don't like to go through the process because it's high sales. They're always trying to sell you something. We don't trust them, those type of things. Whether it's true or not, it's perception. And perception is 100% reality 100% of the time. And so if the industry has a very good perception, then it makes our job easier. It makes it easier to get a higher commission. It makes it easier to represent our clients. If the industry is not trusted, then it makes it a lot more difficult. And even when you're giving good advice to your client, they're saying, well, I don't trust this advice because I don't trust the industry. And that's the whole purpose of this course. We're trying to empower agents to do the right thing and be ethical and make good decisions, so then there's more trust with the public. All right, let's move on. In the middle of page 4, we have setting the stage, the wake-up call, and a reality check. All right, and there's a couple of bullet points there that I want to talk about. And the first one is, why is the industry perceived the way that it is? And there are 3 reasons why in these bullet points. Number 1 is violations of ethical conduct occurs on a routine basis. Now, there are 2 types of violations: violation of license law, violation of the code of ethics. And I would tell you that almost everybody in this business, probably in every transaction, there's a technical or an administrative violation of agency law or of the code of ethics. It's not intentional. It's very marginal in nature. It has really no impact, but it is a technical violation. For example, let me give you one. State law and the code of ethics both mandate that you're required to give a copy of any document that your client or customer signs immediately upon signing. That's why we used to use carbon paper many years ago. They sign it, you give them a carbon copy. Now, maybe you get the signature of your client, you run down to Kinko's real quick, you get a copy and then bring it back and give it to them. Technically, that's a violation, but there's no impact, right? That's a technical or administrative violation. It's still a violation. Or you put your interest in front of your client's. Client found a great property, an investment property, and you decide to bid against your client for the property. See what I mean? The impact is different. So, does this happen on a routine basis? Yes, they both happen on a routine basis in this industry. I would say more so administrative than actual, but it only takes one actual to destroy the reputation of the entire industry that has 1.3 million members. That's number one. Number two, we're in an industry that's required to self-police itself, and we don't self-police because one of the issues is number one, everybody's doing it, so screw it. Number two is many feel that even if I know the agent that I'm working with is doing some unethical business, no one cares. So if I make a complaint to the broker, I file a complaint at the commission, or I file an ethics complaint at the state association level, no one's going to do anything about it because they don't care. That's the perception. Number three, therefore, complaints are not filed. And the other thing is enforcement standards vary from company to company. Some brokers, if you talk to their broker about a rogue agent, some are very diligent about, taking action. Others aren't. That's just the nature of the business. Now understand this. And this is important to remember. We are a self-policing industry. That is a problem in and of itself. Insofar as a broker turning in another agent from a different company, that will never happen. Brokers are in the business of growing their company. They're in the business of recruiting. And if if a broker has a reputation of turning everybody in, they'll never get anybody to come to their company. Number two, agents aren't going to do it because agents, number one, expect the brokers to do it for them. And number two, if they have to do it, they're like, listen, I'm busy. I'm trying to make a living. I just want to get through this transaction, move on, be done, hopefully never do a deal with this agent again. So there's no accountability there. And that is problematic in nature. So that's why. All right. So let's go to page 5. On page 5, we got to talk about this because every industry has a public perception about it. And it's important because remember, if the industry has a good reputation and they're viewed as ethical and honest, then it makes that industry's job easier. The people that are working in that industry, if the Realtor Association or Realtor members had an impeccable perception with the public, it would be so easy to get 7% commission. No one would ever question your advice, right? But they don't, and that's why we have this course. So let's take a look at what Gallup said. Gallup does a poll every 10 years. They do a really comprehensive one that surveys the American public's perception of moral values and which industry that they view as ethical and honest. And the statistics are kind of interesting. So question number one is, how would you rate the overall state of moral values in this country? Now, moral values mean different things to different people. I understand that the definition can be subjective, but it is interesting to note that only 2% of the general population in America view this country as having high, excellent moral values. In fact, over 80% found that only fair or poor to be the case when it comes to moral values. It's interesting because I did see an actual poll by Life magazine from 1961, and excellent was 68%. So look at the swing that's happened in 50 or 60 years. That carries over into industries. Now, the public's perception and how they view industries is interesting as well. Nurses had the number one honesty and integrity perception. The general public had a very high regard for nurses. And by the way, page 5, number one, nurses, you do need to highlight nurses. All right. And if you look at your book, it goes from nurses number 1 to car salesmen or salespeople at 20. And it's interesting because if you look at the top 10 or 15 maybe, but mostly the top 10, those are what we call people in position of service. And so the general public views them as these are people that are going to help me. If you look at the bottom 2/3 or the bottom 50%, people view them, those industries, in the position of power. So those people we got to deal with, but they hold all the cards. For example, look at members of Congress. In fact, as of the day of today, of the day of this video being recorded, Congress has an approval rating of 16%. People view them as they have all the power and there isn't anything that we can do about that, right? So, or very little. So it is interesting the disparity between number 1 and number 20, but nonetheless, they are part of the integrity poll. All right. So let's move on here. Let's move to page 6. Continuing with the same genre here, Gallup poll of moral issues. Remember, the public found only 2% of the people to have moral standards, high moral standards. But what are the moral issues at stake here? Not the standard, but the issues. And you can see abortion, death penalty, divorce, cloning, having a baby outside of marriage, all that. Now, these are values typically that people have, and they change with time. So obviously, let's look at one. Doctor-assisted suicide now has a morally acceptable value of 51%, or 52%. I can tell you that 15 years ago, that was about at 21%. So people's perception, their values are changing. Same with death penalty and all of that. And this is also very geographical. It can be age specific. It can be ethnicity specific. I will tell you, for example, that the older you get, you have a different view or a different value than someone who's 50 years younger than you, and that's to be expected. But the whole point is this changes and ebbs and flows with time and our makeup. All right, so the danger report. I talked about that because the danger report is why we have the 6-hour course. There are 6 bullet points you really need to read through because it is enlightening as to what the perceptions are out there. If you look at number 1, not in unison with a fast-paced world, there is a perception that the general public is becoming more advanced when it comes to searching for properties, those type of things. But yet there is a lot of resistance by those in the realtor community. And actually there's some truth to that. I remember when I first got in the business, there was no multiple listing service. Every 30 days, the board would deliver these big, thick books of all the properties that were on the market, and many of them had already gone off the market by the time the book was even published. So then in the mid-90s, we went to this program called Lightning. It was MS-DOS-based computer program. It revolutionized how we search for properties for our buyers. But there was a good portion or population of the realtor community here in Omaha that wanted the old books. At the time I got in the business, we had the old key. We had a key on our key ring for the lock boxes. Then we went to the electronic lock boxes. And the resistance was absolutely astronomical. The old guard didn't want to move into the new technology. And we face that every time there's advancements in technology. That is an issue, and it's always going to be there. If you go down to changing of the guard, the 5th bullet point down, right? When old ways of doing business are deemed outdated and irrelevant. It's kind of interesting. Some of the old ways are still good, but there are those that don't think that they are. You know, the older, the ones that have been in the business a long time, they value relationships, and their business comes from those relationships that they developed. Somebody that's coming in and maybe newer, it's just about lead generation. They see no value in the relationship building, and the truth is both are important. But there is that changing of the old guard perception. And in fact, what I need you to do for what am I doing here? For your real estate, or for, here's what I need you to highlight here. Please highlight the first bullet point under the danger report, which is not in unison with the fast-paced world. That is something you'll need to refer back to at some point. All right, let's move on here. We already talked about all the danger reports. It is interesting. So I didn't do all the bullet points, but please read through them. On page 7, why should you as a real estate professional study ethics? Why should you know the code of ethics that the realtors have? Why is it important to be professionalism? Well, or study professionalism? Because it makes our job easier. All right, there are 4 bullet points that the author of this course outlines, and I actually like them. Let's look at the first one. It improves society and sets expected behaviors. So if you haven't yet, for most of you, but during your orientation, you're going to learn about the Realtor Code of Ethics. That is the standard of conduct. That is how we expect you to behave. And if you follow the Code of Ethics, then you're not going to have any issues. But what it does is it improves it improves society, but it improves our industry perception. And again, and I mean this sincerely, if a nurse says it, it's gospel. If a car salesperson says it, there's always the red flag and that distrust. Same thing in our industry. And the more that the public trusts us, the easier our job is and the more money we can get through commissions, to be honest with you. Number 2, it defines moral pejoratives to rely upon during times of upheaval and stress. That's an interesting one. You know, if you have a high moral value or you have a true belief in ethical standards, then during the rough times, you weather them much better than somebody else. Let me give you an example. Those that have deep religious beliefs or those that really rely on their faith, when times of trouble happen, they're comfortable. Right now, as I'm videotaping this, we're in the middle of the coronavirus. There are those that are terrified, and there are those that have deep religious beliefs and faiths, and they're just, hey, it is what it is. I'll accept any outcome. That's what it gives us in a business setting. If we have deep ethical values and professional values, when we're dealing with an agent that's not professional, when we're dealing with a client that's not very ethical or professional, the decisions are easy. This is what I'm going to do. And quite frankly, if you don't like it, find another agent. And I'm not married to the commission. That's the peace that it gives you. The next one is it creates excellent working relationships and assists in productivity. You need to highlight that one because you're going to need to know that. And it's very true. One of the problems that we do have in our industry is what I call agent-on-agent crime. The way we treat each other is horrible as real estate professionals many times. And if we just follow the code of ethics that the realtors have, then, listen, we're all in the same, we're in this together. We want to both find a house for our client and, we want to make sure that we want to get paid for the work that we do. And sometimes we make it more difficult than it really should be. And the last thing is that it creates a power marketing brand for public that builds trust and long-term relationships. And I totally believe that. Again, if the public trusts you, then it makes your job and my job a lot easier. So, all right, on page 7 there is a practice if we were in a group setting, we'd be doing this, but we're not going to do it. Okay. One other thing I want to talk about at the bottom of page 7. This is interesting because Carol Murray is the author of this course. She did survey for writing this course several designated brokers across the United States. And here are the major problems that those designated brokers identified in our industry. Some of them I agree with, some of them more than others. But the first one is the first bullet point, antitrust and fair housing violations. I do think it does exist a little bit. But part 2 of this really does. Negative language about their peers and clients. This is rampant because of social media. I can remember just not too long ago, an agent posted a photo. They were showing a property to their buyer, took a photo, posted it to their Facebook page and said, man, these sellers are dirt merchants. Who would want to buy this house? Well, problem is, number 1, legally and ethically, she didn't have the authority to take a photo of somebody else's listing. And number 2 is, don't put that out there. That's so unprofessional. That makes us all look bad, right? There's a time and a place in a private setting to have that conversation maybe with your client, but that's it. That's it. All right, the next one, licensees ignoring client relationships. Actively stepping into another's transaction happens all the time, and it's not okay to do legally or ethically. Everybody knows a real estate agent, so maybe your friend has their property listed with somebody else, and they automatically just distrust anyone in the industry. So as things are progressing, then they're calling you, who's not a party to the transaction, getting advice. That is just not okay. Overstepping boundaries in multi-offer presentations. Conflicts of interest when a dual variable rate is in play. Not so much. It can exist, but not so much. Improper shopping of offers without the client's permission. Yeah, that's an issue. And what that means is you get an offer, a written offer in on the property, and you wait a day or two before you notify your client so you can see if another offer or two may come in. That is not okay. It's illegal in most states, and it's unethical. Now, here's what is okay. Maybe you get that written offer, you call your seller right away and say, hey, I got an offer in, and the seller says, listen, I'm not going to accept one right away. Let's wait a couple of days and see if we get any more offers. That's okay because the client has defined the parameters. Now, you should let that person that wrote the offer know what's going on. I do think that that is an ethical thing to do, but it's not the agent making the decision, it's the client. Choosing title, inspection, warranty companies, mortgage companies that benefit the agent, not the client. That is an issue in this industry, and here's why. Because most brokers and many of the teams that are out there, they have what's called preferred partner list, and they are home inspectors and warranty companies and title companies and so forth that they derive financial benefit from. Most of the time, it's through what we call marketing agreements. So they'll have a list of providers that they recommend to their buyer clients because every month that inspector is paying a marketing fee. And if it's structured right, it's absolutely legal. However, let's say that your preferred mortgage lender can get your buyer client, who you represent, a 4% interest rate, but you know down the road, this bank can get them 2.5% or 3%. What's your moral obligation? What's your legal and ethical obligation? Well, your obligation is to tell them, hey, here's who we like to use, but this down the road, this company has a percentage point less, so you might want to check them out. By failing to notify them of that, yeah, you're putting your financial interest in front of your clients. It's a legal issue and an ethical issue as well. Not disclosing agency representation correctly. The bullet points go on to say failing to get permission in writing to be a dual agent. We're going to talk more about the agency stuff here in the next video. Revealing confidential information. You really shouldn't do that. We're going to talk more about that in a different video. And then confusion on how to answer questions from not only buyer's agents, but your clients as well. This can go a long way to perception of the industry. So for example, and you only get this through training, right? But you need to have answers to things like when your client asks, hey, are there a lot of Mexicans that live in this neighborhood? Or what's the crime statistics? Or, how are the school districts? Or those hidden, subtle fair housing questions like, is this a dark neighborhood? Inferring, hey, are there African Americans that live here? Those type of things. How you answer that goes a long way to determining the perception of our industry. All right, so that's kind of what's out there. Now, I know the next question, and this is on page 8. There's a group exercise that says, what have you witnessed in your marketplace that doesn't seem right? Well, obviously, most of you aren't in the marketplace yet, but you will. As you get in there, you're going to notify that there's a certain thing, or you're going to realize there are things in this industry that just aren't right. The difference is, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to become part of the crowd and say, well, Johnny's doing it, so I am? Or are you going to do the right thing and use ethics, moral values, and your legal standards to make the right decision? And only you can make the decision, but understand this. Whatever you do impacts me and every other real estate professional in the country. That's the difference. All right, we are done with the first video. We're going to move on to the second video.